saw him inhaling his own ashes. The smoke hadn't cleared when I stepped into what was left of Saint Corvinus. Stone arches bent like broken ribs. The air clung with a sweetness that did not belong to incense. It was heavier, like something cooked too long, like sugar burning at the edge of a pan. A man was on his knees in the gray drift, his robes shredded into threads that moved with every faint draft. He bowed, scooped a handful of ash, and poured it over his head. Then he lifted his palms to his face and breathed in. The sound was wet, as if lungs could drink what fire left behind. I didn't speak. My throat closed as I watched the ritual. The ash left trails across his skin, black lines pressed into creases, sinking into pores. When he exhaled, the smoke did not scatter. It whispered. Not a full prayer, not a chant. Only fragments, syllables fractured like glass ground underfoot. They came from under the floor, not from his mouth. A hand pushed up from the drift. Fingers scratched at the half-burned Bible buried there. The pages were brittle, curling at the edges. Letters peeled away like embers, glowing once before fading to dust. The hand kept clawing, as if it wanted to hold a word long enough to keep it alive. I waited for the man to notice me. He didn't. His shoulders shook, chest heaving with each breath of ruin. Smoke rolled out of him in steady tides, not choking, not desperate, measured, practiced, almost peaceful. It was prayer, but not the kind I'd ever heard. Somewhere in the rafters, a beam snapped. Dust fell like pale rain. The whispering rose, more voices layering, thin and sharp. I covered my ears, but it stayed inside, humming through my teeth, curling down my spine. Every word was alive and every word was burning. His breaths grew louder, dragging the ash through his teeth. Each inhale sounded like paper tearing, each exhale like a match hissing out. The gray cloud swelled around him, wrapping his head in a trembling veil. He leaned closer to the floor, palms flat, pressing his face near the glowing fragments of scripture. His lips moved, slow, reverent, mouthing words that had already burned away. Every time his chest rose, the whispers rose with it, a broken choir pulled from beneath the stones. My name is Father Thomas Rourke. I am 32 years old, ordained in Boston, and assigned to Saint Corvinus after the fire. I was not here when it burned. They said the blaze began without warning, climbing the rafters before anyone could ring the bells. No bodies were found. Only residue fine enough to sweep into sacks. I was sent not as a builder, but as custodian of faith, to guard the ruin, prepare it for reconstruction, and remind myself that the church outlives every ember. I believe that. Fire purifies. Fire strips away corruption and leaves only what is holy. In seminary, we studied the martyrs, flesh blackened but spirits unbroken. I held that image close. So when I first walked through the nave, roof torn open, I told myself this was purification. God tests with flame, not with lies. The church stood like a rib cage to the sky. Arches bent, beams jagged like teeth, soot clung to every surface. When I brushed the stone, it left stains that water could not wash away. I came daily with ledgers and notebooks, recording what survived. Melted chalices, twisted candlesticks, stained glass broken into sorrowful mosaics. I tried to work as a caretaker, not as a pilgrim. But the air clung to me, not incense, not candle wax, a sweetness cooked too long, lingering on the tongue like burned sugar. I was not alone. An older priest, Father Henley, was my guide. His hair was ash white, his eyes steady. He had lived through fires before, lost churches, seen them rise again. But when we walked Saint Corvinus together, he pressed a hand to my shoulder. "Do not read anything you find in the ashes," he warned. His voice did not waver. Words that survive fire do not belong to God anymore. I nodded, though I did not understand. Later I asked again, and his tone grew sharp. "Promise me, Thomas, if you find prayers written in this ruin, burn them again, destroy them completely. I promised. At the time, it cost me nothing. A week later, I found a drawer beneath the altar, wood-curled, cavity intact. Inside lay a book half consumed, spine blackened, pages fused. When I pulled it free, flakes fell like snow. On the cover, faint under soot, I read, Evangelium Cineris, the Gospel of Ash. My instinct was obedience. The canons were clear. No scripture outside the canon, no prayers unsanctioned, no gospel unreceived. Every stray text must be burned. Every word not baptized must be silenced by flame. I remembered Henley's words. I remembered my promise. But the binding was warm. The soot clung deeper than dust. When I opened it, I swore I smelled that same sweetness, coaxing me closer. I wrote in my journal, found a remnant, will burn tomorrow. But I did not burn it. Life in the rectory was spare. Dust lay thick on the floorboards. I kept a lamp burning, but shadows stretched long regardless. Some nights I heard the rafters shift though the wind was still. I wrote letters home that I never sent, describing the church as if it were a patient, persistent odor, lingering whispers, inexplicable warmth. Prognosis uncertain. Henley lodged in the next room. Some nights I heard him cough, each rasp releasing a trace of gray. The ash doesn't leave, he told me once. Not once it chooses a lung. He smiled as if joking, but his eyes did not smile. He told me stories at supper, fires in distant parishes, chapels lost and rebuilt, only to burn again. Always he ended with the same refrain. Fire takes what it is meant to take. I wanted to believe him. I tried to busy myself with inventories and ledgers, but each item seemed to carry memory. A chalice scarred by heat felt heavier than gold. A shard of glass cut my palm and left a line that smoked faintly before it closed. At night, I opened the Gospel of Ash. Some lines were sealed in black crust, others glowed faint, refusing to vanish. I traced the letters with my thumb until they smudged. I prayed longer, though not with scripture. Fragments echoed instead. They filled silence with rhythm, as if my own breathing carried them. Henley noticed. "You're sleeping poorly?" he asked. "Yes," I admitted. "Dreams linger," he nodded. "Dreams are only ash remembering. Don't mistake them for revelation." But it felt like revelation. And I told myself, God tests with fire. If the Gospel of Ash had endured, perhaps I was meant to guard it. Faith makes its own logic, and I clung to it. By the end of my first month, I no longer entered Saint Corvinus with caution. I entered like a supplicant. My hands itched to touch the stones, to breathe the air others avoided. The ruin had become my chapel, my teacher. And the book, waiting each night, had become my prayer. The diocese sent surveyors in pairs. They carried clipboards, tape measures, and helmets that looked out of place beside shattered stone. They stayed only minutes. Some whispered a prayer before leaving. I envied their distance. They measured walls. I measured silence. I spent mornings in the nave, afternoon in the rectory, nights with the book. Routine was supposed to keep me steady. Instead, it deepened the pattern. The church shaped my hours the way tides shape the shore. I remember one morning when Henley brewed tea black as soot. He placed a cup before me and said, "Drink slowly. The ash rides the water here." I thought he meant it as humor, but the tea carried a taste sharp enough to remind me of the nave. I set the cup aside. He noticed, but did not insist. He prayed constantly. His lips moved even while walking the ruined aisles. Sometimes he carried a small vial of oil, drawing crosses on the broken altar stones. It comforted him, but I could not see its purpose. The stones seemed indifferent. The ruin answered nothing. I began sketching by candlelight, not drawings of saints or martyrs, but shapes I could not name, curves like smoke rising, letters bending out of line. Each morning I tore the pages from my notebook and hid them in the drawer. Yet every evening my hand repeated the same marks. In quiet moments I tried to rationalize. Fire leaves residue. Residue irritates the mind. Irritations grow into visions. But such explanations felt fragile. Faith should have anchored me. Instead, it tilted. One evening, Henley looked at me across the supper table. "The gospel tempts you," he said without question. I stayed silent. My silence was answer enough. He sighed and folded his hands. "Thomas, I have seen men swallowed by less." I wanted to argue. I wanted to say I was strong. Instead, I excused myself and walked the corridors until the lamp oil ran low. But even then, the book's weight pressed against the floorboards above, calling me back. I thought of my vow. God tests us with fire, and if he tests with fire, then what remains is his truth. That reasoning sustained me. It also condemned me. Every night the gospel of ash seemed heavier, as if the words within gathered mass from my hesitation. Each page held both promise and warning, and still I opened it. Still I breathed the sweetness rising from its spine. I told myself I would read only a line, curiosity disguised as discipline. I set the book on the desk, lit a single candle, and opened to a page where the fire had spared enough words to form a sentence. My lips shaped the syllables. Each letter dislodged a breath of dust so fine it shimmered in the candlelight. It rose in a thin stream, curling upward like smoke from an invisible wick. When I finished the line, my fingertips burned. I looked down. Blisters swelled along the ridges, skin splitting, flaking into ash that fell directly onto the text. I pressed my hands together, whispering explanations. Chemical residue, contact reaction, nothing more. I wrapped the fingers in cloth and convinced myself it would pass. But the cloth blackened within the hour. That night, I returned to the rectory. I told myself to pray instead of read. I forced my lips around the psalms I had known since childhood. Yet halfway through, my voice stumbled into the cadence of that other line. The sweetness rose in my throat, unbidden. At midnight, I could not resist. I opened the gospel again. As soon as the page spread, every candle in the room caught fire at once. Flames leapt high without match or flint. Shadows lunged across the walls. My breath froze in my chest. I closed the book and the candles guttered to embers. I opened it again, and they flared bright. I carried the book to Henley the next morning. He sat near the broken nave, his hands clasped around a rosary. "Father," I began, "I found something. The words, they still feel hot." He did not look up. "Nothing stays hot after 3 years, Thomas. Only sin." "But I felt it," I insisted. "The letters rise like smoke. They breathe." He fixed me with his hollow eyes. "Then stop giving them air." I said nothing more. He would not believe. Or perhaps he believed too much, and that was worse. Still, I needed proof. That night, I set my recorder on the desk. I pressed play and spoke the same line as before. The words fell like stones in water. When I played it back, my voice repeated the first sentence 3 times. Not an echo, not a glitch. 3 distinct recitations, each layered with the others, each louder than the last. I leaned close to the speaker. The final repetition ended with a whisper that was not mine. I stopped the recording. My hand shook so violently I dropped the device. I left it on the floor and paced the room. I told myself machines fail. Tape distorts, nothing more. But the tremor in my chest did not ease. By the 3rd night, I surrendered. I opened the gospel and read aloud entire passages where the ink still clung. Every word released a breath of ash. The air thickened until I coughed gray. My skin cracked, my eyes watered. Still I read. A pressure built in the room, low and heavy, like the air before a storm. Each line demanded the next. Each phrase dragged me deeper. I tried to pause, but silence itself pressed against my chest until I spoke again. It was not will. It was command. Henley caught me once more. "You're pale," he said, standing in the doorway. "I've been studying," I muttered. He stepped closer. "Studying what?" I closed the book. Too late. He smelled the air, coughed hard, eyes narrowing. "Thomas, you swore. This is not study. This is surrender." I snapped back. "It's evidence. If the church knew—" "The church already knows," he cut me off. "That's why it burned." We stared at one another across the desk. The gospel lay between us, black spine faintly glowing, like coal that refuses to cool. He reached as if to seize it, but withdrew his hand before touching. "You think you can master it," he whispered. "You can't. It wants a mouth." I turned away, ashamed, angry, terrified, because I knew he was right. The book wanted a mouth, and it had found mine. That night I dreamed the nave filled with voices, all speaking the same line, all in my tone. I woke with soot on my tongue. I should have stopped. I should have carried the gospel to the furnace. But the urge rose like thirst. I opened again, whispering, reading, trembling. Every word lived beyond my breath, every syllable multiplied. The prayers did not vanish into silence. They bred in the air, thick and restless, waiting for someone to finish what had been started. And I could no longer tell if that someone was me. Morning brought a rasp in my lungs. Each breath scraped as if threaded with grit. I rinsed my mouth until the basin clouded, but the taste returned the moment I opened the study door. The room held a weather of its own now. The curtains barely moved, yet ash drifted in patterns like breath exhaled by an invisible chest. I tried reading with gloves. The latex fused to my fingers in thin, blistered films. I tried reading without speaking, tracing the lines with my eyes only. But even then, dust lifted, and the candle leaned toward the page as if listening. That was when Henley took the recorder into his own hands. He pressed play, listened, rewound, listened again. 3 times, he said quietly, as if the first were not enough. "It's a fault," I told him, "a loop." "Or a call and response," he answered, "and you're answering." He set the device down and faced me. "Say the line," he ordered. "Now?" "Now." I hesitated, then spoke the sentence. The room tightened. The recorder, though switched off, clicked. Henley's knuckles whitened around his rosary. "Again," he said. I obeyed. The second recitation rode over the first like a wave over a sandbar. By the third, my throat felt scored, yet the words left me clean, as if something else had spoken through. Henley exhaled long. "Do you hear it? The spaces between your words?" "They're not empty." "I don't hear anything," I lied. He tilted his head. "Then your ears are safer than your mouth." That evening I barred my door and wedged a chair against it, ashamed of my fear, and more ashamed that fear did not cure me. I opened the gospel to a section where only fragments survived. I read them as they were, broken, like bones set in the wrong order. And still the candles woke, one by one, as if names were being called in the dark. The air thickened into chords. I could not mark the notes, only the pressure they made inside my ribs. Between phrases, I heard the small hiss of letters cooling, like iron unquenched. When I coughed into my sleeve, it came away gray. To prove I was not mad, I performed a test. I took the book into the hall, far from the desk, and opened at random without reading a word. The wick in the study flared from across the threshold. I closed the book and the flame dropped to a weak bead. I opened it again, and the bead became a tongue. Distance did not matter. Attention did. I slept in snatches. In one of them, I woke to a soft patter, as if rain had found its way into the rectory. But the sound came from the desk, ash falling in steady ticks, piling into neat drifts along the margin of the page I had left open. Lines appeared where none had been, strokes traced by settling dust. I ran my finger across them, and the strokes broke apart like ants under the nail. In the morning, Henley knocked. "You look worse," he said. "I'm fine," I lied again. He stepped inside anyway, took one breath, and winced. "It's in the plaster now," he said. "It takes churches like a mold." "What does?" "Words that won't die." I showed him my hands. The blisters had hardened into thin plates, tiny shields of horn where fingerprints used to be. He turned my palm, studied the sheen. "Burns fade," he murmured. "This is not a burn." "Then what is it?" "A use," we argued. "If the church knew what this text does, the church knows what texts do. That's why the canon is closed. But if it speaks, then it wants you to think you're the first to hear it." His certainty angered me. "You tell me not to read," I said, "but you won't take it from me." He glanced at the gospel as a man glances at a cliff. "Because it wants to be taken," he said, "and because there are rules for handling live things." "Live?" "It's parchment and soot." "Then stop treating it like a wound and watch what bleeds." And I kept reading because silence felt heavier than sin. Rain hammered the broken roof, each drop falling like nails driven into the nave. I sat at the altar with the book open across my knees. My lips trembled through the last chapter, the words nearly obliterated, yet still legible enough to tempt. As I read, the air thickened, and the ash across the stone began to stir. At first it was only motion like dust in a draught. Then the lines of powder rose in spirals, drawing together until they formed the shape of a body. Shoulders bent, arms raised, head inclined. A figure of smoke and ember stood before me, glowing faintly as though each grain carried its own coal. I dropped the book. The figure inhaled, though it had no lungs. The flame of my candle bent toward it. Then a voice, low and cold, rattled through the beams of the nave. "Fire never destroys. It translates." I stumbled back, words choking in my throat. "Are you a demon?" "No," it answered, sparks in every syllable. "I am what remains when prayers burn too long." I clutched the cross at my chest, whispering verses against temptation, but the words died before reaching my lips. "What are you?" The figure leaned closer. Its face shifted with the wind, features forming and collapsing into soot. Evangelium Cineris is not heresy. It is the fifth gospel, a hymn written by an angel who gathered prayers heaven refused. Your petitions rose, mine fell back. I am the echo of faith turned to smoke. "There are only 4 gospels," I whispered. "The church decreed it." "So you were taught," it hissed. "But fire teaches differently." Rain thundered through the broken rafters. "I only wanted to save this church," I cried. "I wanted to rebuild what was lost." "You cannot rebuild what was meant to burn," the figure replied. For an instant, its face mirrored mine. "But you can become its scripture." My chest tightened. "The word became flesh," I muttered. "That is the teaching." "And flesh can become word," it countered. "The smoke from your lungs writes lines more enduring than ink." I wept. I never asked for this. I only wanted to serve God. "Then serve him by burning," it whispered. Every parishioner here prayed to be remembered. Fire granted their plea. Each fleck of ash is a syllable. Together they form the psalm you clutch. I looked down. The drifts across the floor were not random. From the choir loft, the pattern revealed itself, letters sprawling across the nave, sentences written in human remains. "Dear Lord," I gasped. "Not Lord," the figure replied. "Translator, the flame that accepts nothing, returns everything." My lungs constricted. Every breath I took carried grit. Each cough left a streak of gray on my sleeve. I realized each cough was a fragment of verse, that my body itself was being revised. Why me? Because you opened the book. Because you chose to speak. Fire always seeks a tongue. You offered yours. It began to preach, voice rising like storm surge. You divide angels from demons as though names mattered. You call what comforts you angel, what scalds you demon. But fire is neither comfort nor scourge. Fire is record. Fire is archivist. It forgets nothing. Cries of mothers in empty pews, vows of soldiers praying to return, hymns sung by choirs who doubted, all rose in smoke. I was sent to keep them. I keep every word. My hands shook. If you are angel, why do you terrify me? Its face bent, half halo, half skull. Did Gabriel not terrify? Did seraphim not burn with eyes? Holiness is not gentle, it is consuming. Fear is the proof you know the truth. I could not answer. My teeth chattered though the air was hot. The figure spread its arms. They asked to endure. Flesh fails, word does not. You envy them though you deny it. Already their dust coats your lungs. Already your ribs hum with their hymns. Already your breath is not your own. I coughed hard, tasting metal and smoke. Streaks of ash clung to my palms like script. My arms quivered, lines etching into the skin, letters formed where veins once showed. I don't want this, I whispered. You are already this, it said. Refusal is still a verse. Tears are still punctuation. There is no silence, only translation. The monologue swelled, pressing into every corner of the nave. Flesh rots, word abides. You priests hoard parchment because it resists flame. Fire gives better parchment. Fire makes you eternal. Think, Thomas, no decay, no forgetting. Only line, only song, carried until the end of time. I screamed, pressing my palms to my ears, but the words bypassed flesh. They resounded in bone, vibrating through marrow. My ribs became organ pipes, my skull a bell, my body no longer mine. The figure bent close, its mouth a furnace. Weakness is perfect parchment. Strong wills resist. Weakness accepts. Do not curse your frailty. It makes you legible. I tried to close the gospel, but my hands locked open. The letters writhed across the page, lifting into the air, twisting into faces that stared back at me. Their lips moved, whispering prayers I could not silence. Please, I begged, stop. There is no stop, the figure replied. Only completion. One more line and you are ours. The storm outside howled. Rain became rhythm. Wind became chorus. The nave shook as if thousands of voices joined together. I collapsed forward, forehead to stone, whispering prayers I no longer recognized. The ash shape raised its arms, conducting the storm itself. Smoke poured from my chest, forming words in the air. The fifth gospel lived, and I was its pen. It pointed toward the transept. A mother stood there and asked for her child to wake. The crib was empty by morning, but her question did not die. It settled into the mortar and waits. I keep that question. At the back pew, a soldier promised to confess if he returned. He did not. His promise did. It rose with incense and fell as soot. I keep that promise. A choir sang on Pentecost and half believed. Faith and doubt burned at the same heat. Their halting notes are still in the rafters. I keep their half song. You give crowns to angels because you want them kind. You paint horns on demons because you want them simple. I am neither crown nor horn. I am ledger, it said. I balance what you offer against what you keep. The pillars throbbed as if the stone had arteries. The floor trembled not with thunder, but with syllables striking in unison. The cracked rose window breathed, inhaling rain, exhaling a faint gray mist that tasted like old petitions. Heat gathered behind my sternum, a coal lodged where prayers once rested. The bones of my hands felt engraved from within, strokes carving outward, each knuckle a small illuminated capital. Translation is not betrayal, it went on. It is endurance. Flesh speaks once. Word repeats without end. When you burned the banned books, you believed you ended them. You only moved them into air. I tried to stand and failed. My knees slid in wet ash. The texture was fine as flour and sweet on the tongue. I spat, and the spittle drew a tiny line that curved into a letter before fading. A novice begged for a vocation and feared he was faking grace. A widower promised to forgive God if sleep returned. A bishop prayed for quiet scandal. Do you think these were unheard? I heard them all. Call me demon if you need an enemy, it said, voice cold as iron. Call me angel if you need an excuse. I require neither title. I require breath. I realized the fear was not of punishment, but of being known too completely. The book knew where my faith thinned. The ash knew the seams in my voice and pressed there. You close the canon because you cannot close yourselves, it said. If the book were endless, your duties would be also. So you said, enough. 4, no more. Fire does not honor your number. The rain changed key. It struck the nave in patterns like chant notation, long and short, rising and falling, until the storm itself seemed to read. In the moving ash, I began to see initials, dates, fragments of names the parish registry once held, the strokes connected into ligatures that moved like fish underwater, never quite surfacing. They asked to be remembered and feared to be judged, it said. Translation grants memory without verdict. There is mercy in being rendered into line. My breath synced with the figure's rhythm. I should have stopped at Revelation. Instead, I read. Each line dragged the next, and the Gospel of Ash opened wider like a wound. The nave groaned as though the walls themselves strained to hear. The air thickened, ash rising in sudden gusts, swirling into a vortex above the altar. It did not drift like dust. It raced, forming rings of burning letters that spun too fast to see. My eyes blurred, every blink seared white. I pressed forward anyway, words ripping from my throat faster than breath. The letters struck me, each syllable carved into my skin, smoking as it entered. My arms glowed faintly where phrases pressed through. I cried out, but the cry was not mine. The sound split, layered, voices stacked until the ceiling shook, windows rattled in their frames. Then the first shatter came. The stained glass of the northern wall burst outward, shards falling like rainbows set aflame. The ash storm roared through the opening, pulling night air inside. I did not falter. I could not. My lips moved, though my mind screamed silence. Father Henley burst through the nave doors, his cassock soaked from the storm. "Thomas, stop! That is not his word." His shout was nearly swallowed by the cyclone. His figure staggered forward against the gale. He raised his rosary, but the beads cracked one by one. I tried to answer, but my mouth only poured sound. A shriek pitched low, then high, then beyond hearing. My jaw stretched too far. My tongue thickened with soot. Each exhale produced not air but scripture, a string of words without origin. My lungs scalded as though they had become bellows for a forge. Henley screamed again. "Damn it, stop!" He clutched the altar rail, his eyes wide with terror. But my voice eclipsed his. The pews rattled loose from the floor. The rose window exploded inward, raining molten fragments across the choir loft. The wind that followed carried sparks that spun like living fireflies. My vision collapsed into gray. Sight burned away. Only shapes of fire remained. I saw veins of light running through the floor, words etched into stone. Each step I took seared new text into the flagstones. Each tear became ink, blackening the storm with streaks. The corruption spread through me. My skin cracked from within, fissures glowing like molten seams. Smoke issued from every pore, curling upward in streams of whispered verse. My heart pounded in meter, each beat another syllable spoken aloud. The ash obeyed, circling faster, drawn into my lungs only to rush out again as voice. Henley stumbled back, shielding his face. "It's killing you," he cried. "This is not grace, it's consumption." But I no longer understood his words. The sounds broke into fragments, meaningless beside the roar of the litany pouring from me. His voice was a faint bell against a storm. The nave gave way. Wooden beams cracked, timbers collapsing under pressure of unseen force. Ash surged like a tide, engulfing choir stalls, pouring down aisles, choking what little air remained. I was both drowning and burning, every nerve stretched to breaking, yet I could not die. I could only speak. The final windows shattered, glass rained like ice. The cyclone tightened, a funnel of glowing script twisting from the altar to the broken rafters. I felt my body hollow, ribs gaping, spine bending backward under the weight of words. My face split into lines, each fissure leaking smoke that formed fresh syllables. Henley dropped to his knees, his voice cracked, pleading, "Lord, save him." The storm answered. My voice drowned his prayer, booming from my chest, yet no longer mine. It filled the nave like thunder inside stone. Words clashed against walls, etched into every surface, burned into Henley's skin as he cowered. I glimpsed his eyes before darkness took me. Terror, yes, but also recognition. He knew the church had feared this truth and tried to bury it, and now it burned free. I collapsed into dust. My body fell apart in a rush of ash, scattering across the altar, swirling into the storm. Yet the voice did not stop. It continued, rising, splitting into many voices at once. The book lay open on the stone, but no reader was needed anymore. Ash spun where I had stood, forming a figure without flesh. Words poured from the vortex, ringing in tones both human and not. The gospel read itself. Faith had consumed the faithful. The prayer had become the prayer. And in the ruin of Saint Corvinus, the word fed upon the mouth that had offered it. The rafters above moaned as if a giant hand dragged across them. Carved angels tumbled from their perches, wings snapping off before vanishing into the storm. The crucifix that had hung above the altar swung violently, chain links snapping one after another until it crashed down into the churning ash. My skin no longer held. It peeled in ribbons that fluttered into the air, dissolving into characters mid-flight. Bones beneath glowed like ivory left in a furnace. Veins of fire ran across me, glowing red and white, pulsing in rhythm with the chant forced from my throat. Every syllable I spoke multiplied into 1,000 echoes. They circled like vultures, pecking at the beams, the floor, the stone walls. The church was no longer building but instrument, vibrating with a psalm no human ear could bear. The bell tower groaned, its stones loosening under invisible strain, each toll a scream without metal to strike it. Henley's prayers fractured. In nomine Patris, in nomine. His Latin broke, splintered, drowned beneath the surge of ash that clawed at his lungs. He coughed and spat black, yet forced the words again. Deliver him! Deliver! His cry vanished beneath my endless chant. The ash cyclone grew faces, at first faint outlines, then sharper, until whole figures marched within it. Parishioners, choristers, the dead burned years ago. Their mouths opened, moving with mine. They sang in silence, the sound issuing from me, not them. Their eyes fixed on Henley, and he shrieked, stumbling back, clutching his rosary tight enough to cut his palms. I felt ribs snap outward like broken shutters. Inside was not blood, but glowing script, ribs bending into letters. My heart split, chambers cracking into the shapes of vowels, beating still but spelling with every pulse. I staggered toward the altar, each step stamping phrases into stone, the ground hissing beneath my feet. Henley wailed, "You are unmaking him! Stop this blasphemy!" His voice thinned to nothing as the roof gave way. Rain poured in torrents, instantly turning to steam as it touched the glowing circle that surrounded me. Mist joined the ash, thickening the storm into a living body of cloud and scripture. The pews lifted from the ground, as if hands invisible pulled them upward. They crashed into each other, wood splintering, forming a crown of wreckage that spun above us. The organ pipes howled, though no fingers touched the keys, each pipe filled with ash that sang when pressed by the wind. My face had dissolved into fractures. Smoke streamed from eyes, ears, and mouth, all three pouring verses in overlapping chorus. There was no distinction between prayer and scream. My own name, Thomas, fell from me as if it belonged to another man long dead. I had become hollow conduit. Henley crawled to the altar rail, reaching toward me with shaking hands. "Come back, Thomas, come back!" he begged, tears streaking his ash-stained cheeks. The storm slammed him down. His body trembled as words burned against his skin, branding him with fragments of scripture he had tried to forbid. The church collapsed inward, pillars groaning, ceiling folding like paper into the vortex, and still I stood, or something of me did. The last of my flesh scattered into the cyclone. I was ash, I was voice, I was scripture. Henley's scream broke, the last human sound before silence. Then only the chant remained. It roared from the ruins with the strength of fire itself, not requiring me anymore. I was gone, and yet the litany continued, a sermon without preacher, a mouth without body. They fenced the ruin with orange mesh and polite signs that said, "Keep out while the rain settled the ash." A week passed. The diocese sent 2 men with clipboards and paper masks, a contractor with a bright helmet, and a deacon with a key to the rectory. They walked the nave in single file, boots leaving temporary craters that filled again as the wind crossed the floor. Nothing remained that could be carried to a reliquary. No char, no bone, no ring warped into a tear. Only a brightness to the dust itself, white as sugar sifted through fingers. They called the result clean. I would have called it finished, but something refused to end. Someone found my recorder on the desk in the rectory, its red light still steady, battery somehow refusing to die. They pressed play without speaking. My voice came through clear, the grain softened by distance. I sounded calm. I sounded like a priest giving an account. I sounded like a man who could breathe. If the word became flesh, what happens when the flesh becomes word? No one answered on the tape. A draft moved the curtains. Paper shifted on the desk. Then the hush again, the kind that exists after a long song ends and the audience does not yet know whether to clap. They rewound, played it again, and set the recorder in a plastic bag as if sound could be quarantined. Father Henley did not return to the rectory. They moved him to a narrow room at the diocesan house. The physician said pneumonia. Henley coughed, but nothing wet came. Only a haze left his mouth each time, fine and persistent, like breath in winter that refused to disappear. They kept a humidifier running and a bowl of water near the radiator. The bowl collected a skim of gray by evening. He told the young deacon not to wipe it away. The deacon wiped it anyway. When I visited, if visiting can be the word for a voice that lingers, I stood at the foot of his bed and watched his chest rise in small measures. He kept a rosary in his left hand and used the right to trace crosses on the blanket with absent mind. Each time he reached the end of the beads, he began again, not with urgency, but with obedience learned from decades. A nurse opened the blinds and said the weather had finally broken. Henley laughed once, the sound thin. "It never breaks," he said. He turned his head slowly toward the chair where my collar hung on its peg. "It only changes mediums." They did not read from the charred gospel. The book remained where it had fallen. Then it did not. The contractor claimed he never touched it. The deacon swore he had seen it on the desk at dawn and could not find it at noon. One worker, a young man with metal splinters in his palms and a habit of humming, told another that every time the wind came, the ash organized itself into seams. He swept them away, and lines formed again, marching across the floor with the patience of a tide. No one spoke the lines aloud. Even the curious respected a certain perimeter of silence. They shoveled the ash into white bags and labeled them with dates and lot numbers, and the labels looked like scripture pressed into muslin. A truck carried the bags to a transfer station. The driver reported that his cab smelled of sweetness until he reached the river, and even then the scent rode the water as if the load had learned to float. The diocese wrote a memo. The memo became a statement. The statement praised the resilience of the parish and promised a plan. It did not mention the absence of bone. It did not mention that the recorder had captured a question no one wished to answer. It did not mention Henley's hand, which now shook when he raised the host, leaving a visible trail of gray for a heartbeat in the lamplight before the air swallowed it. I did not object. I could not object. I lacked the necessary mouth. What I had was a room of drafts and a nave that hummed when no one entered. What I had was the knowledge that the gospel I helped awaken refused to sleep again. Days turned into numbered tasks. They measured the footprint of the old foundation. They marked hazards on a map with small red X's, as if a child were planning a treasure hunt without the joy. They brought in vacuum units with long silver hoses to drink the brightness from the floor. The hoses clogged before noon. The men cursed softly and banged the canisters on the stone. The curse lifted as powder and settled in strings that curved into letters you could read if you stood far enough away and let your eyes rest. Henley asked for the recorder. They brought it and set it on his table. He was too weak to read and too afraid to open the charred pages again. So he chose to listen. He pressed play and listened to my voice ask the question again. He closed his eyes. "Confession should be particular," he murmured. "This one is general. God help us." He reached for the switch, but before he could stop it, the device hummed with a sound like someone turning pages in a far room. He left it running while he slept. In the morning, the nurse said his pillow smelled like a library owned by the sea. I dreamed in second person now. You walk the nave. You breathe the white. You do not cough. You stand where the altar was, and you do not need a book. The sentences arrange beneath your shoes like boards bridging water. You cross because the words will hold. The crossing never ends. The parishioners came back in pairs to look through the fence. Some brought flowers and pushed the stems through the mesh. The flowers took on dust and changed color, as if chalk had been blown across their faces. A child asked his mother where all the candles had gone. The mother pointed to the sky and said, "Up." The child nodded the way children nod when a lie is beautiful enough to keep. One man, a mason who had set the church's steps when he was young, removed his cap and stood very still. "I laid them level," he told the contractor's foreman. "I would swear it." The foreman said nothing. I remembered the way the floor had flexed like a diaphragm when I spoke into it. The man put his cap back on. He squinted at the rose window, which was now a ring of language burned into air. He did not cross himself. He turned away and did not return. A seminarian sent by the bishop catalogued the remaining sacred vessels and made a list of items to be reconsecrated after the rebuild. We always thought the word saved us from the fire. But maybe the fire was the word all along. No one speaks prayers aloud here anymore. Voices are brittle, fragile, too easily taken. They light no candles. They mouth no psalms. Instead, they gather ash in small brass bowls, lift them to the air, and wait for the wind. The smoke does the reading now. The smoke remembers what flesh tried to forget. You can stand at the edge of the ruin and hear it if you are still. Not voices exactly, but a cadence, a pressure, syllables scraped into the ear without breath behind them. The wind moves across the floor and lines appear like veins. Some swear they change with the seasons, some swear they never change at all. Either way, the ash knows more than the people who left it there. If you kneel, the dust coats your skin in faint sentences. If you rise, the marks stay. They fade to the eye, but not to the bone. There are workers who cough in their sleep, not with sickness, but with verses that no one taught them. Their children say they dream in Latin and wake unable to speak their own names for a moment. Then the morning comes and everything feels ordinary. Until they light a match. That is how memory works now, not by speech, not by ink, but by combustion. Fire does not destroy. Fire transcribes. Flesh that thought itself temporary learns it was only a draft. Ash is the final copy. I leave this as warning. If you come to pray, do not open your mouth. Do not think words will shield you. The fire does not care for intention, only for offering, and every breath is an offering. Better to let the smoke rise alone. Better to let the wind decide what remains, for the word has already chosen its shape, and it was never ours to command.